With the recent events around demobilization, one word which strikes everyone's mind is the Cold War still on. After decades of the fall of the USSR, it was presumed that the fall of the Soviets in 1991 led to the end of the 4 decades-long Cold War between the West and the USSR and its allies. So, what is the Cold War? Let's first learn about the Cold War and how different it is from a usual weapon war. Between the years 1946 and 1989, the United States was locked in a tense period of political tension with the USSR, but there were no direct military conflicts between these nations, which gave it the name Cold War, where several more minor proxy wars were fought between allies of each superpower. The unrest led to significant economic effects on the United States due to the 4-decade period of heightened military tension and international manipulation for allies and influence. At that time, the United States followed Keynesian economics, which led to high government spending that triggered inflation. The United States then shifted to tax cuts and Reaganomics, a conservative economic policy that attacked the 1981 to 1982 recession and stagflation, resulting in cutting down on inflation and resuming economic growth, leading to shifted government spending from domestic programs to defense, resulting in the federal debt almost tripling from $998 billion in 1981 to $2.857 trillion in 1989. As Cold War resulted in high militarization, we would look at how this shaped the U.S. economy. Culminating the demobilization, real military spending hit its post-war low in the calendar year 1947 at $10 billion, equivalent to about $132 billion today, or 4.3% of GNP. In the fiscal year 1949, Congress had approved defense appropriations about 20% higher than those for the fiscal year 1948. This high government spending was approved by looking at the state in which their allies were. Events like the Berlin crisis in mid-1948, the communist conquest of China, the Soviet nuclear test, and the outbreak of the Korean War in the mid-1950s led to such appropriations. Now let's look at some figures spent by the United States. During the period 1947 to 1950, the real annual military spending never exceeded $60 billion, but after 1952, it never fell below $143 billion and usually was substantially higher, with the average for 1956 to 1965 is $168. After 1965, the Vietnam War buildup carried the real defense purchases to a mobilization peak in 1968, up by more than one-third. Between 1978 and 1980, the real military outlays increased by $15.7 billion, or 10.4%, and between 1980 and 1987, it increased by $84.4 billion, or 50.7%. For the entire 9-year buildup, annual outlays went up by $100.1 billion, or 66.4%, without being associated with a major shooting war. This vast military spending surge had no precedent in American history. For the entire Cold War period, 1948 to 1989, real military purchases cumulated to a total of $7,051 billion, equivalent to nearly $10 trillion in 1992 dollars, and averaging $168 billion per year, which is worth around $22 trillion today. There was, obviously, substantial fluctuation, with the standard deviation being $44.6 billion. The trend being slightly upward revealed the tendency for defense purchases to increase by $2.6 billion per year on average. Let's look at some statistics on the spending during the Cold War. From 1948 to 1989, the real GNP increased at an average rate of 3.1% per year. The real private spending, 3.0% per year. The real government non-military spending increased 4.5% per year. The real military spending increased 1.9% per year. Thus we can observe that the share of government spending on non-military items tends to increase, while the share of government spending on military items tends to diminish. Even today, no fully reliable numbers have been found on the Soviets' military spending. During the Cold War, there was a whole literature by Dudkin and Vasilevsky, Norrin and Steinberg devoted to these estimates. In a study by the University of Amsterdam, Department of Political and Social Science, analyzing the welfare and warfare in 17 capitalist countries, the following was found. The graph shows the change in the amount spent on welfare versus the amount spent on warfare from 1973 to 1982. Let's now get to the main part of the video, which is the guns and butter theory. The guns and butter curve is the classic economic example of the production possibility curve, which demonstrates the idea of opportunity cost. In a theoretical economy with only 2 goods, a choice must be made between how much of each good to produce. As an economy produces more guns, it must reduce its production of butter, and vice versa. The curve charts the trade-off that occurs within the limits of production in a given economy. Money spent on the development and manufacture of jet fighters cannot be invested in infrastructure repairs, such as the replacement of aging bridges. If a nation chooses to focus on military buildup, the only way for its domestic production needs to be met is through an overall elevation of production. Such an increase would allow for non-military products and needs to flourish. However, it also means the size and scope of military production would escalate in turn. Maintaining such elevated production to meet both needs can prove to be taxing on an economy. The year 1951 witnessed itself better for guns than it was for butter or roads.